Hey friends, welcome to this unconference session where we will talk about headless for the next 30 minutes. So please welcome our speakers from the past sessions. Do we have the speakers with us?
We do.
You do?
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Perfect. So welcome everyone. My name is Morten. I work at Umbraco on our headless team. I'm going to be asking the questions today to our speakers, but maybe this doesn't work for the entire session. So let's try and get my head back. There we go. Now we're back to normal. So let's get our speakers on board, and we can start with the questions. Welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening, this Friday evening, or Friday morning, or Friday night. Or is it, Emmanuel, I guess it's like Saturday morning for you?
It is Saturday morning, 2:15 a.m. Fun.
That's
Wow.
rough. So thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. But let's dive into the questions because we have quite a few to get through. And apparently some of it is for me as well. So that's just a bonus, I guess. But if we start with you, Emmanuel, before you fall asleep, we have a question around the question maturity model that you had, and whether there are any scenarios where you would not use it and just say, this is a no-brainer, you just need a headless CMS.
I would say there would be instances where you would do that, especially when it comes to integrating with a different platform. So, for example, one of the case studies we looked at was the first case study with this pizza franchisor. They were good on their digital maturity model, but even if they were not, that's something I would have definitely gone and recommended Umbraco Hardcore because of the nature of how they were. The e-commerce platform was the major driver, the website, everything was running on that, and content was secondary. Though it was important, it was secondary. So those are those instances where even if their DX maturity is less, you would still get them onto it. And I made sure that we covered that caveat as well.
All right. Thank you. We have a question also for the team from Aarhus around your Next.js implementation. And the question is whether you've had a chance to test out previews with Next.js and Hardcore, or just previews with Next.js. So I think that's a kind of a feature that's built in, right?
Yeah, it is. We actually did have a chance on one project to test out previews, but not exactly with Hardcore. So we're still trying to work through that. I mean, this was a proof of concept really, so we didn't get that far for this project. But cool. we're getting there.
Yeah. And then we had something related to the providers that you showed. I think that was kind of midway in your talk around API providers for Next.js. And the question is if it would make sense that the provider itself, so that would be, I guess, Umbraco in this case, would maintain and make API providers available, or API resolvers available for Next.js. So you'd have something that would be maintained by someone else for that point of integration, or whether what you use is so unique to your implementation that it doesn't make sense to have a model that's ready to go, or provider that's ready to go.
I think if I should start, I think Umbraco partially already have with the client that you used in your demo, and I think most projects will need their own data in their own way. So the way you structure your page or the page type, etc., is unique from project to project. So I don't think it would make sense to make one common way to handle the data across, and supporting Node with packages that you've developed to make it easy to find pages based on the URL instead of the ID, etc. Just utilize stuff like that to make your own fetcher, so you can handle your cache the way you would prefer, etc., etc. So I don't think it would make sense. I think it would make sense if you could internally in the company where you work or from project to project streamline it as much as possible, so that you can get a good start.
Yeah. All right, and then I think there's a quick question also for you now that we're on the topic of Next.js. Someone asked if you can use Google Analytics, if you can get that to work with Next.js and Hardcore. I'm guessing this is in relation to the URLs and capture the right location.
I don't really see why it wouldn't work. I mean, it's running in the client, and with any single page application, you have to kind of trigger the events manually by calling by tracking a page view or something like. So you have to hook into the router in any case and track that to Google Analytics.
So most of your tracking that you do in your application or website, if you integrate it into your React components, etc., will also run when you hit the browser. So it will be the exact same. The only additional part that Next.js will add to it is that capability to server-side render it and even statically generate it if you have a slim structure or if you want to set that up. So yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Yep. Thank you. Then we have one for Poornima related to your Blazor talk. So Tashbahar writes, seeing Blazor with GraphQL, are you able to use dynamic URLs from Umbraco, or am I mistaken?
No, you can totally use the dynamic URLs from Umbraco. So the idea or the concept that I didn't showcase in my demo is the concept of routing, or you can hook into the router of Blazor and handle things at a much more top level before even it gets to the components. So yes, there is opportunity for people to do that as well. So yeah, it is possible. I wanted to keep this really simple because I wanted to show the Umbraco hardcore aspect more than Blazor in my talk, which is the reason I went for a very simple demo.
Yeah.
But I think routing is the concept that you need to look into. And I think from one of the previous talks I did about Blazor, I do have a gist link where someone has actually done this. They have used Umbraco headlessly to tie up with the Blazor app in production, and they are making use of router to get the URLs and then display the content. Yes, it's possible. There are multiple ways of doing it, basically, in Blazor.
Yeah. Cool. And your talk had a lot of details around using Umbraco, so very detailed, and thanks for that. But so there was one thing related to the Strawberry Shake client that you used. So the question is just if there are any gotchas with the generated models, anything to be aware of, limitations maybe related to that?
So this is the first time I'm using Strawberry Shake, in all honesty. So when I wanted to use it in the past with other talks, I just couldn't get it working because there is a very brief setup that you have to do. Like it reaches out to the endpoint to download the schema, and that is how it gets the knowledge of the schema internally. But that's been fixed because there's a preview package out. It's a preview package out there which has got the ability to add the header. So I think with the next release, proper release of Strawberry Shake, I think 11.3 or maybe it will be in 12, you'll have the ability to add the header as a command line option as well. So that's one thing. And I don't know whether it's to do with my instance itself because I've been playing around with it a lot. Like I've got 3 different set of apps running from that instance. So I've got a very big schema. So the client that I have has a huge amount of C# code. And in all honesty, it is like an encapsulation of the HTTP client that you have out there. It does all the heavy lifting for me. But Strawberry Shake is something that is a far lot advanced than HTTP client, or GraphQL client can do for you. So I think there is a learning curve as well attached to it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I guess this is for Benjamin, related to GridSum. So there's a question around whether you actually need GraphQL to use GridSum, or if you could use it from maybe a more traditional REST API, or is GraphQL actually required to get that up and running, or generated, I should say.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, if you look at the February blog post series that we actually did it without the Umbraco GraphQL package, and we did it using REST APIs. So that's absolutely an option. But given that you do still kind of need familiarity with GraphQL, one of the things GridSum does is it pulls all these data sources into its own data store that the build process can then access, and it accesses that using GraphQL queries. So you don't need to use GraphQL to get the Umbraco data, but you do need familiarity with GraphQL just to work with the data once it's been retrieved from whatever source.
Yep. Then we have a question for you, Benjamin, from Bjarke. How do you prevent the search to find items before they are published by the GitHub actions, Umbraco, and thereby examine, node, and new content before the static site?
It's a very valid concern. The way we have it set up right now, there is basically a 2-minute window where things could be available via examine before they're available on the front end of the site. So yeah, you absolutely could end up with, what you would end up with actually is that the Umbraco key that it got back for that published node wouldn't match any of the nodes that the site was already aware of, so you wouldn't actually see the new node in the list of results. So you wouldn't have a broken link there. But there's better ways of handling that. We could have incorporated, as we mentioned, like an Algolia search or a public search provider that we were pushing data into. And we could have done that data push as part of the GridSum build process so that the two kind of went at one time and went out in sync.
Yep. All right. And then we saw today that there was a few different usages of different front-end technologies, we can say. We had the GridSum, we had Next.js, we had Blazor. So I'm curious if, with regards to your usage of hardcore, Emmanuel, between all of these three, do you have a favorite or something that you recommend using? Or so I know you did this example with your cakes. Did you use any of these frameworks there?
Yeah, so we've been working with Lord Lavington and the Lavingtons a lot, and we started off with .NET Core, obviously, because that was our first go-to, being a Microsoft partner house, and then after that we are looking at things with static site generators, again towards the Microsoft stack, but we've also used things like Next and Gatsby as well to be able to pull this content in and work with it. So we would rather go with what the client's requirements are rather than what we would love as a term from a technical side of things.
That makes sense. So I have a question here for the Aarhus team again. I guess this is related to the architecture diagram that you showed, or your infrastructure setup. There's a question here regarding Next.js. Is there any reason you used Azure Front Door for the Node/React/Next app and Azure CDN for the blob storage, where you could have used Azure Front Door for the CDN?
I would say that graph was an example. So that's not a real graph that we use. I pulled it from the Google search to illustrate what a simple would look like. So to answer his questions, no, there is no particular reason for us to do that.
No, in fact, we usually use Cloudflare for CDN and caching in front of our services.
Mm.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Well, I was considering putting in a real graph, but it was just I'd had to zoom out so far that you wouldn't be able to see anything that was on it. So I went with the more lightweight graph.
Yeah, and we have one question here, which I guess is a bit generic, but so we can run it past all of you. So we can start with the Aarhus team, since you're already going. So the question is, would you use headless even more and more in the future? So if we start with you.
We only build headless solutions nowadays and have been doing so the last 2 years, I think. All our solutions are headless, yeah, with different CMSs. But yeah.
So definitely.
Yeah, we'll continue.
That's great. What about you, Poornima? Would you use it more and more in the future? Oh, you are muted.
Sorry about that. The classic mistake these days, I guess. So yes, headless CMSs, hardcore, like really intrigues me. I don't have anything going on at the moment which uses hardcore. But what I'm doing is in my free time, I'm investing a lot into playing around with different technologies and what I can do with hardcore, like Alexa apps, or most recently I wrote about Google integration, Google Home integration. Blazor is one, and I'm sure there'll be more chances going ahead.
Yeah. What about you, Emmanuel? Do you think that's something that will be used more and more from your side of the earth, so to say?
I would, but it would base basically on again the digital maturity of that client, because as soon as you start introducing headless into a organization, let's say who wants just a rich brochure site, they're going to just if you don't have the correct people, they're going to resent it. And whereas there are in the Umbraco ecosystem itself, there are so many other things which could really help them to go. And the other thing is hardcore. Definitely, I love to use it. And Morten, maybe you need to get in us data centers here in Australia, because that's something which is holding us back. And I heard you talk about taking it to the US. So yes, think about Australia, and definitely we'll have clients who are really wanting to use it and who are mature enough to use it.
Yeah, you just need to improve your taco game, then we can look into it. What about our friends in the US? Do you think it's something you'll be using more and more going forward, or?
Yeah, definitely. So similar to Emmanuel, I'd say it's a bit of a case-by-case basis. And sometimes it may be using more of just a static site. We've used usync actually to just build static sites, which is great. And so I would say it depends on the client, but we're definitely looking for opportunities to use it as much as possible, especially with cloud regions in the US coming up. That's very exciting for us with hardcore.
Yeah, and definitely I think that I don't see a future ever where it's just going to all be headless. But I definitely can see that, as you know, we're just starting into this journey, at least at ProWorks, and so I think that for us, we're definitely going to use it more and more, certainly more than we have in the past. Yeah,
and I saw that in one of your slides you had one of the points was that was low cost. I'm assuming that was from a hosting perspective, and is that what makes the static sites so appealing, that you can really reduce the cost of hosting, or are there other factors that
I think it's
points
more
to
than
the low
just
cost?
hosting. Yeah, I think. I think it's more than just hosting. I think hosting is definitely a portion of it, but there's also the development complexity. When you have to have a single team working in the same code base for both the front end and back end changes, that can make things more complex than if you're able to split those out and potentially have even two different agencies working on a project. One that's focused mainly on the front end and the design of the site, and one that's focused on, the back end of either just getting the data structures right or potentially aggregating data from separate disparate sources. When you can break those pieces apart, you get cost savings and just people not stepping on each other's toes so much.
That's one of the biggest benefits I believe we see, is that we really use it to be as productive as possible. So we can have a team working on the brand experience and implementing the design and making sure that everything is just working in that part, while our customers are getting or migrating the data in a more systematic way, and the backend team is managing that end. So we're not dependent on each other in that sense. So this clear separation is actually what allows us to work more swiftly in bigger teams.
If I can jump in as well, nowadays you with headless and hardcore, you don't need a CMS developer as such or Umbraco developer. Any developer who knows how to consume either GraphQL or RESTful API is able to jump in and start working, because that's common, rather than knowing, hey, this is how I do it in CMS X, this is how I do it in CMS Y, and so on and so forth. So that's allowed us to go out and recruit top-notch talent who don't know CMSs but love to build things.
Yeah, good point. And then we had some questions around whether there are any plans to allow hardcore to be used outside of Umbraco Cloud. And that's a question that we commonly get, and the short answer is no. Umbraco Hardcore was built for as a cloud service in mind, and it was built as a way to provide this content as a service approach. So there's no plans to make that into like an off-the-shelf type of thing that you can then take and run anywhere. That does, of course, prove or have some challenges for certain types of clients. And as I think you mentioned, Jason, as part of your talk, that there are certain companies that have to host it themselves for legal reasons, or if they're government agencies, there are some data protection concerns in there. In those types of scenarios, that's where we would typically point to community packages, like the GraphQL package that you're working on. So that's hopefully some of the places where the community can kind of pick up the pieces of where you need something that's not maybe provided by HQ, but hopefully if the community can come together and fill those gaps, then I think that's a good approach to it. I don't know what you think, if how much time you're spending on it. And
Morten?
Sorry?
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that?
Yep.
So if we're not, and I can understand not splitting it, are you thinking when Umbraco Cloud moves into different regions around the world, will Hardcore follow it? Will it be at the same time that Umbraco Cloud is introduced in the US or in other areas? Will Hardcore be introduced as well, or will that follow shortly after, or will it follow at all?
That's a good question. I guess my answer is yes, maybe. No, so there's some complications to that, because the idea with Hardcore was, or one of the ideas was also to be able to scale it globally. But then when you look at data privacy, then there's potentially some issues there, because if we start scaling it and we put the content, when you publish it and we put it anywhere, whether that's Europe or the US or Australia, it's available globally when you publish it. So there's some legal things there that we need to figure out. If that's just part of the deal, when you publish it anywhere. Like if you were using a CDN, then when someone accesses it from somewhere, then it's available there. But it really depends on how it's covered with regards to content, whether that's considered something like media, where it's not a problem that it comes out into edge locations. From the Umbraco side, I mean, we can definitely host the Umbraco side of things in the US. But I think it's the part where we start scaling it that becomes complicated. So that's why I can't say a definitive yes today, but it's something that we want to do, and we want all of the cloud products to follow, so that everything is available in all the different regions. So ideally, it should be available. Probably, maybe not from day one, because our first order of business is really making the region available, and then if something like hardcore requires a bit extra, then it would follow afterwards. So I guess it really depends, but we want to make it available to everyone, closer to where you are.
Awesome.
Let's see what else we have. So if we stay on the hardcore track, there's a question around whether there are any plans to allow for developers to extend the Umbraco backoffice with custom content model properties, form fields, and such. So I can mention that for hardcore, one of the things that we have on the roadmap is that we are doing like a first iteration of custom property editors, where the first iteration will be around being able to pick external data. So you basically take any data source, a JSON feed of whatever kind, and then plug it into a property editor, which you can then define whether it should be a drop-down list or a checkbox list or those types of things, and then use that on your content to select content or to select data that's external to Umbraco. So those are one of the first things that we'll look into, and then from there we'll move out into what can we do to support the people that want to customize even further, and how we can support that in terms of the back office. Because that will mostly be, it will only be for the back office where you can customize things. So from there, we need to figure out exactly what we can allow and how we make it work with GraphQL as well. And I guess that could tie into a question around the GraphQL package, because that's something that I'm curious about, how you handle custom property editors. And if that's something that just works out of the box, or if you need to do something special with the GraphQL implementation, or if there's some limitations around querying when it's custom property editors. So I guess that's for you, Benjamin.
Yeah, no, great question. I actually had to deal with that as we got new block list data in that we hadn't been dealing with previously in the GraphQL package. And so the short answer is it uses the get value method to actually get the data. So it will go through any custom property editors that transform the data. And if it doesn't recognize the data type, it will just convert it to JSON data that gets returned back. But you can, it is also extensible, so you can plug in your own handlers for specific types of data to say that if I have a custom data type, I want it represented in the GraphQL result a certain way.
Yep. All right. I think I just have to check my timer because I think we are running out of time. So we still had a bunch of questions left, but unfortunately our time slot is coming to an end. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and for your excellent talks on all things headless. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for all the questions. I guess I kind of owe Paul Seal an answer, which I said in the chat that I would answer, but I've run out of time. So, Paul, I owe you an answer on what I promised, but hopefully we can take that offline. But once again, thank you for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.